Thanks for joining us, everyone. Welcome to How to Become a Climate Resilient Church. My name is Avery Davis Lamb. I'm the Resilience Intern with Creation Justice Ministries, and we're so glad that you decided to spend this Tuesday evening with us to learn about how you can build climate resilience in your church community. Just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Please always keep yourself on mute. We'll have an opportunity for question and answer at the end. Most of that will be facilitated through the chat function in the box. So if you have a question throughout the program, please put it in the chat and we'll put a pin into it, and hopefully we'll be able to get to your question at the end. I'll also share that this program is being live transcripted. So if that is an accommodation that would be helpful to you or someone else you know, Margaret will be posting a link to that in the chat, so please avail yourself of that transcription. The third thing I'll say is some of you received the pre-participant email for this program, and thanks to everyone who filled that out. We got some really good data from that. If you haven't had a chance to fill that out, please do so. I just dropped it in the chat right now, and that helps us understand better who is here learning about how to become a climate resilient church. So I'll start with going over the review of the agenda for today. So here's what we'll be looking at. We'll start out with a prayer and reflection from Bishop Staccato Powell of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. We'll talk about why resilience and why now from me. We'll hear from communities responding to extreme weather from Reverend Vernon Walker. We'll hear about a resilience hub in action from the Reverend Liz Steinhauser. And then we'll learn about how to become a resilience hub from Reverend Walker before rounding it out, talking about spiritual and community resilience. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the esteemed Bishop Powell. Bishop Powell is the presiding prelate over the African Methodist Episcopal Church Western District. He's an amazing voice on justice issues across the gamut. He also serves on the board of Creation Justice Ministries and provides a particularly important perspective right now in the midst of climate disasters. And he's also a fellow Duke Divinity affiliate, having graduated from Duke Divinity School. So I will hand it over to Bishop Powell for our opening prayer.
Thank you. Thank you, Avery, and welcome to everyone. Let's pray. Spirit of the living God, we are grateful for the privilege that you've granted us together from across the length and breadth of the landscape, for the express purpose of considering your wonderful creation, the glory that you have blessed us with. And as we go forward to discern around building climate resilient churches, we know that your word has taught us that except you build a house, they that labor in vain. We've not always been good stewards of the good earth that you've given us, and made us the stewards of the same. So help us now as we go forward. Bless each individual that's on this call. God, heighten our awareness and equip us with the pragmatic implements that's necessary to do the work that lies at hand. We pray for those that are vulnerable, those that are in island nations, and those of us who live in the western side of this nation who are experiencing wildfires, and those that are in the wake of hurricanes and all other disasters that come as a result of our not being protectors of the earth that you've given us. Remind us that we live on one planet and we have to protect the same. Help us, Lord, as we go forward. The name that matters most, we pray. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for the privilege, Avery, and to all of you who will be sharing around building climate resilient churches. I think that the time is now. It's the fierce urgency of the now as we see the things that are happening in not just this nation, but the world, but particularly as we see what has been happening over the last several weeks in terms of the hurricanes, in terms of the fires, both in California and in parts of the state of Washington and Oregon. It just heightens the reality of why this is such an essential conversation to be having at this point. We can no longer look away, and we can no longer think that it happens other places, but many people are being disproportionately impacted, even displaced. Some of the things that we're witnessing in areas that were once seen to be insulated are now being disproportionately impacted to the detriment of everyone. This isn't an issue that only impacts people of low socioeconomic levels, and neither does it have a racial, ethnic background to it. And I would even say it is apolitical, because climate change impacts us all. And as people of faith, we have, in my estimation, a real divine mandate not to sit this one out, but to engage. We have been instructed by the Creator that we were given this earth, and it's up to us to do what is necessary to make sure those that will come after us will have the kind of planet that will be sustainable and also nurturing in the years that are ahead. So I'm encouraged by the fact that so many of you who are on this call will be those that will take this hue and cry forward and will be tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that we don't squander the resources that we have been so generously blessed with. And so my charge to each one of us is not simply to have a discussion that's amorphous and esoteric and engage in the policy issues, which are extremely important, but we must, on this issue, not just be a professor and confessional of the faith, a confessor of the faith, but a practitioner of the same. This is as existential as it gets. It doesn't get any more real than what we're experiencing now. So it is my prayer and my hope that this discussion will lead to greater action. And let me congratulate you, Avery Davis Lamb, for the work that you are doing. I bring greetings on behalf of the entire board of Creation Justice Ministries and our very capable director, Shanta, who has done a fabulous job. And let's put our shoulders to the wheel and press forward and not get weary in well-doing, for due season is on the way. Thank you. Thank you for the privilege to share.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for that grounding, Bishop Powell. Turning our face towards the problem in hope and in readiness for the work that lies ahead of us. Thank you so much for that. All right. And thanks again to everyone who has joined us today. To those who have just hopped on, welcome. We're glad to have you here for How to Become a Climate Resilient Church. My name is Avery Davis Lamb with Creation Justice Ministries, and this is being co-hosted with Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. So I'm going to share my screen here and start off with the question that Bishop Powell so helpfully provided a segue for, which is why resilience and why now? So why do we need climate resilience? Well, as Bishop Powell said, what we're dealing with right now are simultaneous climate disasters that are plaguing not only the coasts, but throughout the Midwest, the Southeast, and the Southwest, not even to mention around the world. And this is coming to be the story of not only 2020, but the last couple of years. What's clear is that the climate crisis is not something that is in the future. It is something that has arrived here today and that has become intimately familiar to many of our communities. I'm sharing two photos here, and you may not even be able to name which disasters they're from, because it seems like we're surrounded by a West that is perpetually on fire because of climate-dried brush, heightened drought, decreased rainfall, and then on the East Coast, warmer waters, which equate to more intense hurricanes. What we're facing is the worst wildfire season in the history of the West, and what is shaping up to be one of the worst hurricane seasons in the history of the East. So what we're facing is a need in our communities to deal with these disasters and take action to limit their severity. So we have these large-scale disasters, of course, but at the same time, we have some of the more pervasive, slower, everyday impacts like sunny day flooding and heat waves, things that are going to continue to get worse and worse and worse without having the same kind of devastation as wildfires and hurricanes. This is what the author and activist Rob Nixon calls slow violence, and it's the violence that is more pernicious, but perhaps as devastating or more devastating than the wildfires and hurricanes that we're looking at. And importantly, why we're here today is that churches are going to feel these impacts as severely as any other institution that is existing in this era of climate change. And even more importantly than the fact that they will feel these impacts is that our churches are in a position to respond to these impacts by building community resilience in order to better weather climate disasters. So that's why we're here, to understand how churches can be hubs of climate resilience. Now, of course, I know all of you know this because I've seen it in the data that you shared. This is a chart from the pre-participant survey that some of you have filled out. What climate disasters are the most immediate dangers in your community? You can see that we're already feeling these impacts in our community: hurricanes, wildfires, sea level rise, flooding, pollution, heat waves, and that's just the top 6. What I want to communicate to you today, and what I hope to communicate through the wonderful panelists, is that not only are churches going to be facing the impacts of climate change, but our churches are particularly situated with the assets that are needed to help our communities weather the spiritual and the physical impacts of the climate crisis. This starts by building resilience in our communities. So let's start out here with a definition of resilience. Resilience can be one of those squishy terms that is thrown around a lot, but no one really knows exactly what it means. And I want to make sure that we're clear about what we mean when we say resilience. So resilience is not merely focusing on adaptation to the detriment of mitigation. And it's not focusing on adaptation or mitigation to the detriment of building democracy. But what it is it is the combination of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and deep democracy, so that as a total, we can build resilience in a way that both prevents the worst kinds of disasters in our community, that starts decreasing our greenhouse gas emissions now so that the disasters aren't as bad, and that ensures that all of the people we love and care about have access to the decision-making power that is supposed to be part of our democratic society. So this definition comes from Pathways to Resilience. And I want to highlight that Pathways to Resilience positions the term resilience as not resilience as bouncing back from a disaster, but resilience as an opportunity to bounce forward toward a more just and equitable society. And resilience is not one thing, but it's a combination of multiple factors working together in tandem. And the hope for today is to start in on understanding what some of those factors are and how we can build resilience using those factors in our communities. So all of this framing that I've shared so far leads us to the question we're looking to answer today. And that is this: how can our churches be hubs of climate resilience in our communities, helping our neighbors weather the spiritual and the physical storms of the climate crisis? This question is central to our churches as we work on responding to the biggest crisis of our time. And it's an extremely localized question for a global problem. It's one your community will need to ask over and over again as our climate continues to change. And it's with this question in mind that I'm going to hand the microphone over to Reverend Vernon Walker with Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. And he's going to talk about how we can take a huge step forward in addressing this question. Go ahead, Reverend Walker.
Thank you so much. Um, Thank you so much for the eloquent, uplifting prayer, Bishop. It certainly warms our heart that we have people of faith that know how to lift up a prayer that touches the throne of heaven. So thank you so kindly. Avery, thank you so much for helping frame our conversation. Again, framing is important. And to you all who are on this call from across the country, I am peacock proud, elephant happy to have you all with us, that you have taken some time out. You could have been in any Zoom, but you're here with us. So we appreciate that. And I am zooming in from Cambridge. So I want to share my screen and show you some slides here, and then we will go on. So this event is brought to you by the communities responding to extreme weather in partnership with the Massachusetts Library Association, the Blue Marble Librarians, and more importantly, Creation Justice for this particular event. And we are just really extremely elated and glad that we have a wonderful working relationship with Creation Justice, and we look forward to continuing to deepen this relationship as extreme weather is more present in our world and becomes increasingly more present as we shall see. So this event is part of over 45 events that we've had throughout the week. We normally have Climate Prep Week, and this is our third annual, and I'll get into the mission in a second of Crew, but this is our third annual event, and we've had central events, and we even have another event tonight. And tomorrow we have an event around the link fight for racial justice and climate justice. So if you missed some of the events on last week, you certainly missed a treat, but don't despair and don't worry, because we certainly will post those on climatecrew.org's website. So you will have an opportunity to delve in and to check out the video. I think you are certainly in store for a wonderful, pleasant treat that will bless your socks off. So we want to thank all our community partners. We've been blessed to have so many work with us, including Creation Ministries, Creation Justice. We've just had so many, and certainly this week would not have been possible without our partners. I also want to mention that there is a drawing contest that ends September 30th. And there is a prize for each age category. The age category of 3 to 9, age category of 10 to 13, and age group 14 to 18. The winner from each age group will receive a 1-year membership to the Trustee Foundation, Massachusetts' largest preservation and conservation nonprofit with more than 100 reservations. And you can learn more at www.thetrustee.org. So if you know some young folks that are in your household or you are connected to, and they like to draw and they like to express their artistic ability, please consider this drawing contest. For those of you that don't know, Crew is a young grassroots organization, a program that works to build equitable, inclusive, and neighborhood climate resilient in New England through hands-on education, service, and planning. So we will stop this screen share, and we will slip over to another screen share. But before I get over to the other screen share, just want to share a thought or two with you all, and then we will be going over to that other screen share. Simply, we see in the book of Genesis, beloved community, we see that God has given Adam a charge to be a good steward and care for the earth. Genesis 2:15. The scripture is clear that the earth is created by God and it belongs to God. In Psalms 24:1, it says that the earth is the Lord and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. However, as a result of the abdication of Adam, which a lot of Christian traditions subscribe to, we face many environmental problems such as pollution, extinction, and deforestation because of the curse. Certainly, it is argued that when Adam sinned, the ground was cursed, Genesis 3:17, and the whole creation now groaneth. Romans 8:20-22. Sisters, brothers, people of goodwill, however you identify, we are living in some very dark and difficult days, the likes of which we have never seen before. There are many injustices happening in our world today that manifest in the form of racism, sexism, ageism, classism, xenophobia, environmental devastation, and other forms of oppression. However, I believe that the preeminent social justice issue of our time is climate change. Certainly, climate change, for those who may not be aware, is a change in the Earth's long-term global temperature and weather pattern. The planet is in a state of great distress because of climate change. The climate crisis represents an urgent and existential threat to civilization, with an internal consensus of scientists agreeing that humanity must drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by 2050 if the world were to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius without endangering the existence of humans. So we must understand, recognize, and realize that we are in the midst of dealing with extreme weather because of the climate change and because of the damage to the earth, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to share one more PowerPoint with you all. And I want to just share with you a little bit about what we do, and we'll get into later how your church, how your faith community can become a resiliency hub to uplift the local constituents that you serve. So we talked about this. I believe everyone can see my screen. All right. Everybody can see my screen? All right, thumbs up. Great. So we went over what CREW is. Our motto is climate resilience and social resilience. It was Professor Corey Robertson, who teaches, I believe, at a college in New York. The challenge of our present moment is not simply to recognize and acknowledge the vast inequalities that the coronavirus has put a spotlight on. It is to realize how much we depend on these inequalities and then act accordingly and collectively. So CREW has a multifaceted program. And one of the facets that we're here to talk today to talk about is resilience, climate resilience. We have different opportunities for what that means. We have climate resilience hubs, which serve as outreach, education, and engagement hubs for local communities. We have climate resiliency centers that serve as outreach, education, and engagement hub for a community. Also serves to provide electricity, internet, and cooling during extreme weather events such as floods, stormwater runoff, heat waves, etc. And then we have climate resiliency shelter. So we see that these are multi-level. A climate resiliency shelter serves the two functions that the Resiliency Center and Resiliency Hub serve, with an additional function of serving as an overnight powered, supplied, equipped emergency shelter during extreme events. Somebody asked the question, what does it take to be a hub? If we were all in the same room, I'd actually look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, do you have what it takes? But essentially, everyone has what it takes. You know, a lot of faith communities has what it takes to be a resiliency hub. And one of the things that we commit to at Crew is sending a decal. This is what this decal looks like for hubs to display it in their window. We also make an emergency preparedness kit, sample kit, and we send it to hubs so that they can display to their patrons. And also, we ask that hubs host a yearly event, which more can be held, related to climate preparedness. So these are some of the hubs that we have here in Massachusetts. We have one in Houston, Rice University, their library. We have one in Canada, and one of the hubs is St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. And I'm going to get ready to turn it over to Reverend Liz Steinhauser. But before I do that, just want to share what our goal is for every Massachusetts resident to be within 20 minutes by foot in the urban area, by car in the rural area of a climate resiliency hub by 2030. And we'll talk about the global expansion. We'll talk about the national expansion. Certainly, the reason that Massachusetts is on here, folks of goodwill, is because Crew is a Massachusetts-based organization. However, we have an eye towards nationalizing, even going international, as we also have a hub in Canada, and we have one already existing in Houston, and we have 25 more hubs coming through our relationship with the American Library Association. If you have any questions, I want you to call, and we'll send this in a follow-up email. My colleague, Margaret Thurston, she is the Climate Resilience Coordinator, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. So now it is with great honor and pleasure that I introduce the Reverend Liz Steinhauser, who is doing tremendous social justice work in the city of Boston. And I am going to turn it over to her right now.
Great, thank you so much, Reverend Vernon. Again, my name is Liz Steinhauser. I'm the Senior Director of Community Engagement at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, which is in the south end of Boston, not to be confused with Southie or South Boston if you're not from our area. It's a big difference between the neighborhoods. I'm an Episcopal priest, but I'm primarily trained as a community organizer, and I've been doing my work at St. Stephen's for the past 17 years. And I am virtually broadcasting to you from our parish hall, where you can see some young people doing some mindfulness and yoga exercises. And just as a way of introducing myself to you before I tell you more about our church and our programs and why we became a resilience hub, I want to say that my influences in my life and my motivations for what I do come from at least two things. One, I grew up in Girl Scouts, so I want to give a big shout out to Girl Scouts who made me love camping and the great outdoors, which is part of my interest in climate and environmentalism. And then the other thing that influenced me was radical nuns. So I don't know if you know any radical nuns in your lives, but they taught me a lot about liberation theology and the idea that we, in reading the gospel, should think about a preferential option for those who are on the margins, whether that is margins because people are young, or because they're people of color, or because they're poor, or because they live in the city. And so I'd like to think that my ministry and my life's work has been doing those two things together. So as a way of explaining to you why we became a resilience hub, I just want to show you some slides also. So at St. Stephen's, our mission is to promote equity in education, employment, and opportunity through long-term relationships with young people and their families and communities. So I know a lot more about public education and about teen programs and about positive youth development than I do necessarily about climate change. But when you see these photos of what we do with about, we see probably 250 young people in a typical year. Obviously, this is not a typical year, and about 600 young people in the summertime. And we run 300 days of youth programming a year. And so this past summer, we did a lot of changes to be responsive to the COVID crisis. And we used our building and the outdoors a ton. So just wanted to give you some, you can tell that the kids are smiling even behind the masks. But our priority is to help young people develop into leaders, to help families get what they need. We provided a lot of food and cash cards to families this summer in response to the crisis. We helped young people use technology in some new ways to tell their own stories, to gather and to have some joy, and despite the fact that a lot of them hadn't been in school for the last 4 months and had been separated and isolated. For some of the young people, when they showed up to the summer program on the first day, they had literally not left the house in months. And you can sort of see how some of them felt about that as they came to a playground. That was our photo for the summer. And this is what we're doing right now in terms of our in-person programming. We run programming at 2 sites for elementary and middle schoolers, and we also have a ton of teen programming. A lot of it is happening in person and virtually, and we're figuring out a lot of things around what we're doing in the morning to help with virtual academics, as well as continuing a lot of the work that we do with college and career mentoring and helping young people think about their future. And we also do a number of things with the 3 local schools. So I tell you all of those things, here's us helping some more families, because it really influences why we wanted to become a resilience hub, because we want to make sure that we can keep running these programs for young people. And our young people, their families, they're vulnerable in a lot of ways. We're in a city, so we have some of the same challenges that many city churches and communities have, in that our young people have high rates of asthma, which has to do with the sort of pollutants that are in the air and brownfields that are in our neighborhoods, but it also has to do with the quality of housing that young people are living in. And more recently, in our building, it's built actually, when you walk downstairs in our building, this is the main floor, but when you walk downstairs, we are already 10 feet below sea level. And so many of our classroom spaces where we run programming for kids is actually very, very vulnerable to rising sea levels, because our first floor where the yoga is happening is at sea level. And when you walk downstairs, even when there's a light rain, it's still, the floor gets damp and it starts to flood. And that's with a lot of mitigation that we've already done with our building. So I think that we as our program have learned a lot in the COVID crisis that relates to climate and why we've become a resiliency hub. I would like to think that even before being invited by Cru, we were a place of comfort and sanctuary, and where people could build their skills of resilience even aside from some climate issues. But I agree with the previous speakers, there is really no aside from climate right now. It's sort of the central issue that we need to be thinking about and talking about, even as we're also addressing the virus. So I think that COVID has actually taught me and us a lot of things that is relevant to our work on climate. One, clearly we're all connected into new and new ways. Like, it's so obvious how when we breathe our air, someone else is breathing that air in, and that can keep us safe, or that can make us sick. And I think that we have often operated with the idea of Ubuntu. I don't know if folks are familiar with that phrase, this idea that what heals you heals me, and what harms you harms me. It's a sort of theological, philosophical concept that comes from South Africa, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu has really popularized it. And what that means is that when some of us are vulnerable, we're all vulnerable. I think that the photos that we saw in the beginning that Avery showed of floods and fires really demonstrates that. And I think what Bishop said too, I think that like many crises, they fall first on the marginalized and the poor, but very quickly they impact all of us. And I guess the other thing that I would say that I've learned is that COVID is a trauma. The economic crisis we're in is a trauma. A lot of our teens and young people face trauma from gun violence in their neighborhoods, and that's been true from before. And what we know is that trauma is healed in community, and our churches are communities. And I think that that gives us a special skill set in helping people to heal. My concern right now is, as we have increased divisiveness in our national language and rhetoric, that that web of connection and community that helps us to heal from trauma, including climate trauma, is at risk. And And so I'm very interested in being part of this national call. Never been on a national call about climate or the environment before. I'm very honored to be here with all of you. Is that if we can build our connections, that's going to help us build our connections into Be Hubs in our local places, and that ultimately is going to increase the amount of healing and connection for all of us. It does take a long time to heal from trauma. It takes a long time for lungs to heal from COVID. It takes a long time for forests to regrow after fires. It takes a long time for cities like New Orleans to recover, if they do, from hurricanes like Katrina. But it is clear also from COVID that if we have the will, we have the money as a country to make these solutions, and we have the ability as a global community to actually change our behaviors almost immediately, to stop driving our cars, to stay at home, to have different behaviors. And I think we can apply what we learned from COVID to the climate. So I will defer to the other speakers and pass it back to Vernon. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Reverend Steinhauser, for elaborating and elucidating what it is that you all do at the St. Stephen's Church. It's certainly uplifting on the work that you all do. Someone asked a question. What is an example? And I know we're a little ahead, but I want to address this question before I delve into specific actions on building resiliency. Someone asked the question, what's an example of an event, or what's an example of an annual event? It could be a book reading, it could be a virtual book reading or in-person book reading, it could be organizing a community conversation where residents can come in to your church, or or to your faith community, and have a conversation about what does climate resiliency mean. Certainly, as the Reverend Steinhauser said, we live in a very polarized society. We live in a society that has a lot of artificial barriers to humanity come together. We have artificial barriers such as one Democrat and the other's Republican, and the other one's independent, and or one black or one's white, or when we are genetically, we have over 90% of the similar makeup, except for color or pigmentation of skin. And we look at climate resiliency hubs as a way for community members to come together. Because at the end of the day, what this virus, I believe, has taught us, the coronavirus, is that we are all interconnected. It was Dr. King who said that we are tied in the garment of mutuality, the inescapable garment of mutuality. What affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And he said, I cannot be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And then when you are what you ought to be, then I can become what I ought to be. And then we can be human together, as Bishop Desmond Tutu said, that our humanity is bound up in each other. So essentially, what are the steps to build resiliency? First, recognizing that we are all tied in the inescapable garment of mutuality. I think that's number one, to recognize that, yes, we will have political differences. Yes, we will have theological differences. Yes, we will have ideological differences. However, the commonality that draws us together is our humanity, our shared humanity. Because at the end of the day, we mentioned there was a report that came out last year that says that, just to localize it for a minute, Boston will feel like Alabama by 2100. So we understand that it's going to increasingly get hotter for longer days. It's going to, and storm water is going to continue to happen. Floods are going to continue to happen. Hurricane tornadoes are going to continue to happen because this is correlated to climate change. However, we can do something about it, because look, I know it's easy to drink from the cup of despair. And essentially, our present and our future world today seem dark, dismal, and hopeless. It seems like there are many floods of chaos, storms of confusion, winds of mayhem blowing in in our world today. It's interesting because we see mass shootings happening with such regularity that it almost appears that a disregard for human life is common, particularly in the media. And we also see that there's a lack of concern for other human beings. And interestingly enough, children and adults can't feel safe in many places as there has been mass shootings in movie theaters, schools, houses of worship, etc. But we believe that becoming a hub will send an additional invite for people to come and learn about resiliency and what does it mean to be interconnected and what does it mean to have an understanding of our shared humanity. What does it mean to have, even sometimes have difficult conversations about climate change. And just so you know, we at Cru, we are nonpartisan. We keep the focus on extreme weather because we understand that climate change is a very politicized term. And for us, we want to talk to Democrats, Republicans, independents, people of faith, people of no faith, people of goodwill, people of moral conscience. We want to talk to Lottie Dottie and everybody. But in order for us to talk to Lottie Dottie and everybody, we have been intentional about staying away from the political divisiveness of climate change. So what we would like, or we would stay away from the term climate change and really focus on extreme weather. And we will have a Q&A, but if you in your facility, your worship, your house of worship would like to become a resiliency hub, I'm going to share my screen again, y'all. I want y'all to see this here. My colleague, Margaret Thurston, is the coordinator for Climate Resiliency Hub. And again, we will send a follow-up email. And we're not looking to necessarily be another thing to do for your community of worship, but we are asking that communities, even if they can't commit to, even if your community can't commit to being a climate resiliency center or a climate resiliency shelter, we're not necessarily asking that churches become shelters. If y'all have the capacity to do so, that certainly will be a blessing. But there's a very low bar to become a resiliency hub. We'll send educational material that y'all could display, in your central location in your house of worship, that parishioners can take, for an example, or community members can take. We have PDFs about heat waves and how to recognize heat stroke, how to recognize frostbite, and how to survive winter, right? And that's if you live in a place with those manifest climate impact. Let's say you live in California. Let's say you're not necessarily, or let's say you live in a climate where it might not be a lot of droughts and heat waves, but it might be stormwater runoff. Well, we're in the process of editing and creating new material. Because at the end of the day, so one of the actions to become a resiliency hub, and then I'm going to turn this back over to Avery in about a minute. One of the actions to building resiliency and becoming a hub is to indicate, first of all, let us know you want to have a hub. And we letting us know you want to become a climate resiliency hub, and we can have a deeper conversation. We will arrange a conversation with you. We can have a conversation with you or your faith community, on behalf of your faith community, rather. And then let's talk about what will a hub look like in your localized context, because it may look different according to people's localized contexts. And again, at Cru, we commit to, sending materials, and we commit to ensuring that resiliency hubs have information necessary to educate local patrons and local congregate community members about what it does it mean to be prepared. And we also have literature that we could share in terms of academic readings if folks like to get into that. Because at the end of the day, climate resilience, as we noted earlier, is social resilience. And real quickly, I'll share this. In Chicago, there was a heat wave in 1995 that killed about 739 people, 39 people. And the reason that it wasn't more, according to the study by Claire Klingberg, who released the book Social Autopsy of the 1995 Chicago heat wave, is because the most vulnerable in the community were connected to someone. And for us, the way we help build connections is not only through Resiliency Hub, but we also help build crew teams. But that's a whole nother subject for another day. But really, crew teams are a team of people who want to connect, who are intentional about connecting in the neighborhoods that they live, and they want to connect with others rather. And so we have a crew team here in Massachusetts, and we're looking to continue to expand that. But I'm going to hit a pin right there, and I'm going to turn this over to Avery to discuss spiritual resilience.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend Walker. I just want to name a couple things that Reverend Walker and Reverend Steinhauser said. I think they're two huge pieces that they talked about. The first is that climate resilience is social resilience. Especially for our churches, what we do is we provide the connective tissue in a community that allows for us to be the source of hope, the source of resilience, and the source of both physical and spiritual assistance when climate disasters do occur. The second, which is what Reverend Walker is getting at, is that climate resilience is always localized. We think about climate change as a global problem, and it is a global problem in the sense of what's causing it, but climate change is a deeply local problem in the sense of the climate disasters that we're facing. So what we're presenting to you today are a few climate resilience frameworks that we hope you can take with you and apply to your own community. With that, I'm going to share a few ways that you can use theological language, religious language, and practical materials that are specifically written for churches to start having these conversations in your community. So we'll start by sharing about the Faithful Resilience Guide that was put together by Creation Justice Ministries. And one of the questions I want to take up here is how we can practically talk about climate resilience in our congregations. We received some questions beforehand, particularly about how to discuss climate resilience in a setting where the community associates climate change with a particular political ideology. And I think what is important here is that our churches have particular assets, both physical, social, and spiritual, that we can leverage to respond to climate impacts. So what we need to be doing is leveraging those assets through a theological frame that resonates with our community. So it's important for us to ground the building of resilience in our church, both theologically and scripturally. So what we've offered here is the Faithful Resilience Guide, which is a 6-part guide to building spiritual, physical, and social climate resilience in your faith community. And what you'll find in this guide are 6 ways of engaging. These are 6 practical ways that you can build climate resilience in your church, through land, through advocacy, through responding to the needs of the community, through addressing climate migration, through your physical building, and through worship. I wish I had time to dig into all of these right now, possibly in a webinar in the future. But this guide is available online at creationjustice.org/resilience. For each of these themes, you'll see scriptural grounding, theological reflection, guiding questions, practical steps for implementation, and a success story. So I want us to look at 3 of these themes and offer some reflection on building community and spiritual resilience in your church, in addition to the excellent practical steps that we've received from Cru. The first question is, how can we prepare to support our local community in climate disasters? So, like I said earlier, the first step to becoming a resilience hub in your community is to ask the question, what are the needs of my community? How is my community manifesting the climate crisis? Second, what assets are at my church can be leveraged to address those problems. So for example, here on the left, we have volunteers from Miracle City Church. There's a huge volunteer network at this church that is able to respond whenever there is a flood in Baltimore, get out there and provide flood response to their community. On the right, Crosstown Church in Charleston has huge financial assets, which I know is not true for most of our church communities. But if you do have financial assets, then you can leverage those. For Crosstown, they commissioned a hydrological study to assess why their community kept flooding. And through that, they're able to provide practical scientific recommendations to the city of Charleston. The second is worship. And this is important because in our worship, this is how we create rituals to deal with the traumatic and spiritual pieces of the climate crisis. So the way we structure our worship life resonates beyond the walls of our sanctuary. And by incorporating elements of climate education and worship of God through creation, we can develop norms that support God's people and creation in the midst of the climate crisis. And third is advocacy. It's asking the question of how we can create a just and beautiful world for our neighbors now and into the future. And this gets back to climate mitigation as resilience. We have to make sure that we're advocating for the communities who are already being hit hardest by the climate crisis and advocating for policies that ensure that climate resilience or that climate disasters are prevented into the future. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we will move over into the question and answer period of our time. So we'll take the last 10 minutes or so here to address the questions that you've asked. So I'll go over and look what questions we have here, and I'll be facilitating this among our panelists. So to start with the question that was provided through the pre-survey, the question is, well, there are a few questions on this topic, which is, how can congregations who are not directly impacted by the climate crisis or by climate disasters stand in solidarity with those who are impacted by the climate crisis? And I'll say that the issue of climate migration is particularly important here. What's become clear is that climate migration is not only going to be an issue on a global scale, but it's going to be an issue internally here in the United States. There was a New York Times piece that just came out, I think this last week, that actually shows how much climate migration will be occurring inside our country, just with internally displaced people. And so what we're facing here is the need to build climate hospitality. In an era of climate migration, we need to rethink what hospitality looks like for our congregations. So that means reshaping the use of your building, for example, so that people who are displaced from hurricanes or from wildfires can stay there. It means if you're doing a renovation, maybe building in some showers so that they can take a shower there. It means being open to, if you're a congregation in Kansas, for example, it means being open to people who are fleeing from the Mississippi Delta or from the inner coast of North Carolina, or even from the Sierra Nevadas of California. It's taking this virtue of hospitality and applying it to the age of climate change. Let's see, another question here. Okay. Vernon, I'll direct this question toward you. The question is, how can older churches who do not have a lot of funds work to make their church more climate resilience? And what personal choices toward resilience can people make that will have some impact?
Thank you for that question. A church building doesn't necessarily have to modernize. So we're not necessarily asking for churches to undergo a fundamental renovation project. But for even with older church buildings, and we have a lot of them here in New England, as they are all over the country, there wouldn't necessarily need to be any retrofitting. So Cru is not necessarily asking for folks to asking for a hub to retrofit, but just to really like display in the vestibule or, a visible place within the building where people can see material, and they can feel free to take material with them, like a PDF, any PDFs or things of that nature. And what was the second part of that question?
How, on a personal level, we can work to build resilience?
I think just being intentional about reaching out to people, in spite of our differences, whether they be theological, ideological, etc., and seeing the humanity, the shared humanity that we all have. And particularly, as you mentioned, Avery, all communities will be affected by climate change, but it disproportionately affects Black and brown and low income, low wealth communities. So I think it's important to, on a personal level, to involve oneself if possible. And it may be a little bit it may be much easier now that unfortunately that we're living in a pandemic, but everything is Zoom, so people don't have to leave their home. But I don't think it'll be Zoom from here until forever. Maybe Zoom until at least there's a vaccine, but if one comes about. But I think just finding opportunities to connect with people in the community, whether that's a neighborhood community group, attending a neighborhood community group, or attending a organization's community meeting, or even looking up community organization within one's community and finding out ways to connect, to be able to build bridges and overcome walls that exist in a lot of our communities.
Great, thanks for that, Reverend Walker. Again, the church and parishioners as that connective tissue in a community. So the final question, and there were several questions both in the chat and in the pre-survey about this, which is the connection between climate resilience and advocacy, and particularly political engagement, which is on all of our minds right now, just about a month away from the election. So to answer that question, I'm going to share what will be the October webinar in our climate resilience series, and that is looking at democracy as resilience. So we'll be looking at engaging in the voting process as resilience, and work on expanding voting rights. We'll be looking at particular federal policies that are focused on building resilience and how the next administration can incorporate resilience planning. And then third, we'll be looking at resilience not only on a federal but on a state level, and providing some takeaways for a number of different states where resilience is being built. So go ahead and write this date down. We'll send out a sign-up link to everyone who's registered for this email. But we have great speakers, Dallas Conyers and Christina Peterson, as well as perhaps some others that we'll add in. And then I want to end just by sharing these resources for staying connected. Again, creationjustice.org/resilience. You'll find some great faith-based climate resilience resources. Climatecrew.org, which is where you'll find how to sign up to be a resilience hub. And they also have a number of amazing resources on building resilience. And then finally, if you're in the Southeast Faith Leaders Network is an excellent way to get connected with faith and climate leaders who are doing good work in an area of the country that's particularly affected by climate disasters. With that, I want to offer a deep thank you to all of our presenters, to Bishop Powell, to Reverend Walker, and to Reverend Steinhauser, to the amazing team at Cru, who's provided excellent, seamless background tech support, and finally to all of you for tuning in to join us today. My prayer is that you'll go forth, do the good work of climate resilience, because it is indeed the work where God is calling us in the midst of the climate crisis. Thank you all, and be well.
Thank you all. Blessings.